Hi, welcome to Lecture 11, Emerging Trend in Lean Construction. So this is just an introduction to lean construction. We talked about emerging trends in our Introduction to Construction course a couple of lectures ago, so I thought I'd sort of finish things off with this sort of a emerging trend in lean construction because it kind of gets you thinking about the overall construction process and areas where we can make improvements on. And some of the links I've provided we've talked about before, but it's worth investigating again. So you can take a look at some, and other ones are kind of new. So, some problems we have in construction that are kind of systemic problems that have affected the successfulness of a lot of construction projects include not having fully complete documents, drawings, specifications, because we talked about contract types in the course, design, bid, build. Often they're rushed. They're not fully complete. They're bid on, projects start, and then there's problems, and that can be definitely an issue. An unknowledgeable owner that really doesn't know the importance of making decisions in a timely fashion, doesn't really understand the implications of changes and the impacts it has on construction projects. Poor contractor staffing performance, that would include all your subcontractors, right? And so that times ties into time, cost, quality. All of those cause issues when somebody doesn't do something when they're supposed to, or they do it but they don't do it to the specifications and you have to redo it. Construction safety, that's a big concern. We talked about the moral and ethical side of things. We want to make sure that we're operating in as safe a way as possible and that we're doing our due diligence. Site logistics, making sure that the site is best set up to manage the project and organize it in an effective way. Waste. There's a lot of waste in construction. So our job as construction managers should be to reduce or eliminate waste. And we should have a focus on that and continuous improvement. And poor information, poor documentation, that becomes an issue, right? So if we're not really fully documenting things effectively, tracking things effectively, not being fully transparent with the information we do have, more problems, more problems. Poor payment, that would affect cash flow and contractor viability. If you can't pay somebody because you weren't paid, then it kind of has this trailing effect. The financial crisis of 2008, obviously, when banks were in jeopardy of failing and they couldn't transfer funds when needed, that would have a ripple effect through the whole economy if that wasn't taken care of. Well, we run into that in construction when somebody doesn't pay a major contractor and if the amounts weren't effectively monitored. So we also run, there's high expectations. Clients have very high expectations, which tends to lead to tight schedules and tight budgets. And so these are common issues in construction. So lean construction really is a series of methods, principles, and it really is an ideology too about how we can be better at running our projects and how we can really ensure that we get a good steady flow of work, that we're trying to add value. There's two key principles in lean: adding value to the customer. And if you study lean, the customer can be anybody you're providing something for. So if I'm a drywall taper, my customer would be the painter, as an example. For sure, if you're the general contractor, your customer is going to be the client. But at different points too, you could be the customer for a subcontractor because maybe you have to have a clean site and it's accessible. And if you're not providing that, then your subcontractor can't perform their work. So we're definitely putting a priority of flow over over the individual. And so it's prioritizing the success of the project, prioritizing adding value over individualistic priorities, which really in construction, I hate to say it, but is requiring a change in the way we think about things. It's not all for me and to heck with everybody else. I want to get in and out. It's more about how do we add value to the project overall, and then how do we all reap the rewards of that in terms of being more profitable as a result of that. So there's a bunch of things, and as I said, this is just an introduction to lean. There's a whole pile of different lean principles that come into play. Little's Law, which really values throughput over individual priorities, as I mentioned, and trying to reduce or eliminate potential bottlenecks which cause an interruption in the flow of work and our ability to be successful. We'll talk a little bit about variation today, pull control, which we'll also talk about. Learning based, though we understand that we have to be able to improve and we have to be able to learn from what we're doing. And it incorporates the aspects of the original lean manufacturing, which is plan, do, study, act, or you may also have heard of plan, do, check, act with PDCA, meaning the same idea, right? People focused, respect for people. You're not going to get people's full engagement if you don't show respect for them. And so there's a whole bunch of aspects within lean principles that tries to ensure that we respect people and we also tap them for their knowledge and get them engaged in the success of the project, because all of us is smarter than any of us, and that's a lean principle. And we can always do better. We can always improve. So these are some of the high-level sort of lean principles that come into play. And this sort of image from This Is Lean, a textbook on that topic, or a book on that topic. Capacity utilization. All right, so key, workers waiting for work, work waiting for workers. So we want to definitely try to fully utilize our capacity and reduce variation. Variation is kind of the negative problem that we run into lean projects. Every time something is going outside what we expect, we have variation. And that tends to cause problems because it interrupts the flow of work. It interrupts the expectations. And if we're trying to get time frames nailed down, trades will tend to protect themselves by not giving you their real information. Like they'll try to, if they think it's going to take 5 days, they'll tell you 10 days, and that gives them a lot of flexibility. But meanwhile, it means there's time frames where nothing's being done on your project. So you have work waiting for workers. In construction projects, it's a big issue. And in this course and in other courses that you've done, you've seen that by going to construction projects and looking at construction projects. And anybody in the construction industry sees that, where something sits there for sometimes weeks before something else happens. Well, why is that? Well, you've got work waiting for workers. So essentially, you don't have the trade. They're not ready to be there, unfortunately, and something got done ahead of time, or they weren't properly scheduled or properly committed to doing what you needed them to do. So everybody's kind of acting in their own interest and not in the interest of the project. So everyone acts individually instead of the best interest of the project. That becomes a cultural thing. It's an industry problem, to be sure, and it's one that we need to work on to get better in this particular industry. It's kind of like what you see maybe in some countries with COVID-19, where you don't see people looking out for other people, right? And the aspect of it, without getting political on this, but where you've got mask wearing is required, and then some people saying they don't want to wear masks, and they're looking at their individual rights over, say, the benefits that it can do for the whole community. Tends to not work out in those communities too well as far as the spread of the virus. Tends to not work out too good in construction projects as far as adding value to the client and profitability for everyone to be benefiting from that. So just sort of an analogy I thought I'd draw upon, whether you agree or not. Edwards Deming and J.M. Duran. So these are two of the original developers of lean in manufacturing. And so a lot of principles from construction come from lean manufacturing. depending what you read, they'll say no and they'll say yes, but there is a lot of principles that come out of lean manufacturing. What of course had to change was it is not lean manufacturing, it is lean construction. So we don't have the same kind of repetition you have in manufacturing. We don't work in the same kind of enclosed environments that you do with manufacturing. So there's a bunch of differences, but a lot of the overarching principles are similar. The continuous improvement aspect's a big principle to think about that's the same throughout. And so what was it? Well, these two individuals, they were U.S. quality control experts in the 1940s after World War II, and they didn't seem to be well appreciated in the U.S. market, but they seemed to see a big opportunity in the rebuilding of Japan and the Marshall Plan, rebuilding of Europe, rebuilding of Japan, but particularly Japan. These two individuals went there and helped a lot of Japanese companies to make improvements. Particularly, one of the companies that benefited the most was Toyota. And so the whole Toyota production system came out of a lot of the work that was done by Edwards Deming in regards to continuous improvement. And a good example is this one mentioned here, where later on, this is decades later, the Toyota was actually making, not Toyota, sorry, Ford was making cars in the US, and they had the transmission that was also made in Japan. I think it might have been Mazda, they own both. And they noticed that the transmissions that were made in Japan were not having the problems the ones made in the US were. But how is that? The tolerances were the same. But when they looked at it, the Japanese manufacturers or the plants in Japan took their specifications, looked at them and said, oh, we can do better than that tolerance level. We will make it tighter. We'll make it tighter and we'll make it tighter. And then what essentially happened was less vibration in the transmission, less breakdowns, and much less breakdowns. And so it's that aspect of, well, whatever you're doing now, you can do better. And reviewing things carefully, is there a way of doing it better without it actually even costing more? So that comes into play there. And I may have mentioned that before because it's a story that's really worth sort of sinking into and remembering because Ford learned from it, because up to that point they really were having a lot of issues, quality, even though they wanted to say quality's job one. So workflow is they used to have a slogan, quality's job one, but I don't think they really lived it at that time. But I think since then they've made massive improvements in that way. So that's the other thing with businesses. If you're the number one in quality 20 years ago, that doesn't mean you're going to be the number one in quality today. If you win the Super Bowl 2 years ago, doesn't mean you're going to win the Super Bowl today. So continuous improvement tries to keep you in the playoffs because you keep improving. If you just stay where you are at, other teams will improve, and indeed, usually you kind of go down a little bit. So a big principle of lean construction is workflow and trying to have a good, steady, even, predictable, reliable, key kind of words that get used in here. And again, this is just an introduction. That makes us be able to better foretell something in advance. That makes it more reliable, consistency in the system. So we work at trying to improve workflow by minimizing variation. And there's two types of variation, common cause and special cause in variation, all right? So when we think about variation, we look at, lack of worker motivation, unsafe work practices, lack of worker experience outside the normal expectation, not following consistent processes or standards. So then there's a whole pile of things from a lean perspective that we can do to work on these individual areas to bring about improvements, right? Common cause variation falls under these categories. Special cause variations, environmental conditions such as weather, soil conditions, backhoe breaks down, chiller unit from Texas is stopped at the border, delays in submittals cause a big turnaround time in our project, design errors. These are special sort of cause. These are more system related internal causes, right? So you can look at the various causes and you can actually categorize them, and you can look at where can you make the most improvements in variation. And you can sort of break it down. It gets pretty detailed in this area, but again, I just want to give you an introduction to this. When we want to think about directives, what are we supposed to be doing? What's the work that needs to be completed for us to do it? And what are the resources we need to have? And so that's what we're trying to do for each activity. Make sure that we're clear on what we're supposed to be doing. We're clear on what has needed to be done. And we've got somebody that's willing and able to do it. If where we get variation is whoever is doing it, there's not enough of them, and the ones doing it are overburdened, overworked, or we have things that aren't being done properly and we have to redo it. These cause variations, production variations in our ability to get done what we need to get done. And so these are like sort of upper and lower tolerance areas in the variation process that comes into play. And workflow variation either overburdens or idles the crew. So it's either you got too much to do or too little to do. So you got, things aren't ready for you. So you got workers waiting for work. You got too much to do, so you got work waiting for workers because you can't keep up to give it to the next party. So when we think about a river flowing downstream, underproduction upstream leads to workers waiting for work downstream. Overproduction upstream leads to work waiting for workers because now you've produced more than was expected, and then there's nobody ready to take it. So you don't have a continuous flow in the work. And in lean, we have 8 areas of waste. And the 8 areas of waste, you can actually spell the word downtime. That's probably the easiest way to remember that. So we have defects, which is rework. Overproduction means that you're producing more, like that you haven't got the ability to keep up, or you're producing more than you need to, as I mentioned earlier. So you're producing more and it's sitting there, right? The work is waiting then for workers. So a good example would be if you've got a condominium building going up and the floors are going up, the structural superstructure, and you've got the curtain wall coming up, and it's coming up faster than the ability to continue to do the floors. Well, at a certain point, they're going to get stuck and they're going to have to wait for more floors to get done. So in that case, you've got work waiting for, you've got the workers waiting for work. Waiting, workers waiting for work. So then when we've got to wait, it's the reverse. Non-utilized talent, that's underutilized talent. So you're not using the experience and expertise of everybody that's on your project to their best. So you're wasting expertise. You're underutilizing talent. This happens a lot in construction. So you engage that using, in lean construction, what we call the llast planner system, which is getting that engagement of the talent involved. You do that by respecting people and engaging them in the work and in the planning sessions to make sure that their thoughts and knowledge are incorporated into the plan. Transportation, there's a lot of waste stuff. We've talked about this a little bit before in, I think, our lectures 5 or something around that nature, or maybe earlier, where we talked about site logistics and sort of the project management and site superintendent's work. Inventory, same idea. If you've got too much, if you haven't got enough inventory, that basically you run out of it, and then you haven't got anything till more stuff comes in. Wasted motion, not being effective in your motion and efficient, and extra processing, doing more than you need to do. So this is a quick sort of overview. I could spend 2 hours just on this very easily because it's important, but just to give you an introduction, whole aspect of lean is to reduce that waste. And so we talked about supply chains. This includes your subcontractors, all of those areas. The Japanese word for it is muda. That's where that comes from. Size buffers to minimize variations. So we want to have certain, if we want to try to minimize variation, we can create some buffers. But in lean, we try to, like in construction, sometimes we have huge buffers, and then that leads to work waiting for workers and vice versa. So we try to minimize the work buffers. So if we create buffers, we then work at trying to minimize them. So size buffers to minimize variation. So we've got enough on hand, as an example, inventory to do what we need to do, but don't have so much on hand that it's getting in the way and causing other problems. So we use it to reduce variation. That lowers the river from upstream to downstream work, things that are proceeding. It lowers the river. When you lower the river, you see the rocks and you say, okay, we allowed for a 3-day variation. Can we allow for a 2-day, a 3-day inventory? Can we allow for a 2-day inventory? We'll have less stuff around the site. It'll be easier to work. It'll be cleaner. And you work it, and what usually that does is expose some weaknesses in the system, and then you can work at removing those rocks so that things flow more smoothly. So that's really how we look at, that's an inventory buffer. Capacity means we have extra. So maybe we have two tunneling machines when we're working and we're tunneling, or we have capacity buffers. We have some extra piece of equipment that we can switch out if this piece of equipment needs to go to a maintenance issue, right? So we plan for that. That's a capacity buffer. And a schedule buffer means we've allocated a little bit of extra time in case we have some unexpected bad weather, so we can deal with that aspect. So big thing is to try to remove variation, and it's a short-term. Buffers are short-term because then we're concentrating on reducing the buffers, and that helps us to reduce the amount of workers waiting for work and work to wait for workers. So it's that combination of things. So this is like a point that we work on, and that we work on decreasing so that we're able to be more effective in our project management. And so that's what we call lowering the river, to better expose the issues so that then we can start working on them. So it's that's that continuous improvement. All right, so we got rid of this issue, and so let's see, can we shrink this buffer from 3 days to 2 days? And then we expose, well, it's going to cause this. How do we stop that issue from occurring? Maybe in the supply chain, we get a priority contract set up with that concrete supplier, so we can better reliably get concrete so that that doesn't become an unnecessary issue. It's that observation aspect of what's going on. It really ties into further studies, which is plan, do, check. How are we doing? And acting to fix it. So it's a cycle that goes around and around. And think about construction. That's what it is. It's a cycle. We plan. Plan's not going to go exactly. How are we doing? Can we make adjustments? Iterations to improve. And that's going to increase and improve the flow, as opposed to not paying attention with it and just being in reactive mode all the time. Not the best way to proceed on projects. So with reliable promising, this gets into another area that looks at, well, we've got all these variations, and a lot of at the root of it has to do with people and relationships, and our ability to actually build in trust and commitment into those relationships is a fundamental part of lean construction. Traditionally, construction can be very adversarial. And so we try to look at, well, how do we make it less so? And so in lean construction, and lean construction incorporates a lot of knowledge outside just lean. If it makes sense to run, then that's fine. So some of you may look at some of this and say, no, but I see that in regular construction. Well, that's great. If that's working in a company that is just not using the name lean for certain things they're doing, that means they shouldn't do it. They should do it if it's working, right? So reliable promising is trying to look at different ways of being able to improve those relationships and have them less adversarial. And for sure, integrated project delivery, which involves people's engagement early in the design process, is a good way of doing that, and reducing those breakdowns that occurs through reliable promises. You got people engaged in the design process with ideas, and those are becoming part of the design. You're going to get stronger commitments from them because they've crystallized how that should take place. So it helps to also build trust amongst the team members. It also means when you run into problems, as you will, it doesn't matter what type of format, you have better trust in the parties and a higher level of willingness to step up. And that's a big deal, stepping up. And that's building on the long game, not the short game. And that's providing value to your customer. And customers can mean a lot of things in the subcontractor handing off to another subcontractor, but also from a holistic perspective of the customer as a whole. So creates ownership, accountability, and responsibility, right? But not being threatening from an accountable perspective. You know, sometimes the way we word things, it's like, you're accountable for this. It's more that the individual takes responsibility, and if they screw up, they take responsibility for that too, and others are more willing to step in and help. So that all will lead to less rework, less defects, less waste, and it will increase value. So reliable promising is in the context that we're talking about it. It contains the customer, the performer, and remember, customers who we're handing off something to, the performer or the supplier who's doing the particular act or activity, a duration, and at a level of competency that it is meeting the quality expectation for the project, and mutually agreed conditions of satisfaction. So clarity on what exactly somebody is delivering. And this ties into what we call SMART goals as well, and goals. And, you know, we've talked, depending on our view, we've talked about SMART goals, but it's worth going over in a more granular way. So what makes a promise or commitment reliable? Performer has the resources, you're able to do it. And you also have the ability to say no, because just being hit with a hammer to say you're going to do this, and then that's not really going to bring you to a reliable promise. It's kind of like blackmail, or it's kind of like coercion to do it. It's not going to get you the result, right? So you have, if that's the case, if there's something that's bothering you that you don't feel that you can deliver on it, then you should be able to say, I could deliver on it if I got this, this, and this. What is preventing you from being able to deliver on it? And maybe that's something that could be negotiated to lead to that success. And so they have to be able to have the time to do it, the authority to agree to it. So these are all kind of filtering into each other, right? Competence or access to necessary competence to be able to perform it at the level that's expected, right? So you want their buy-in to it. You want to make sure that they bought into it and that they've had time to plan to do it. So getting to goal principles, because reliable commitments and reliable promises ties into goal commitment. And prime principles of goal theory are, you got clarity, challenge, commitment, feedback, task complexity. There's been a lot of research been done over the decades by a lot of people too that stand out to me are Locke and Latham. And that's been kind of transferred into a way that describes it that's easier to remember. So SMART goals, it really spells out the specific acts of setting a goal. So specific, well-defined, clear to anyone that has basic project knowledge. It should be understandable, should be measurable. We can see how well we're doing on it. It should be agreed upon. It goes back to the stakeholders, right? So if they don't think they can do it, they should be able to say no. So from the stakeholders' perspective. From your perspective, is it well planned out? Are they trustworthy? Are they capable of doing this work? Is there any roadblocks that may potentially occur? Got to have a time frame. gives some motivation to it, and we need to be able to have some effective control over our ability to manage the project effectively. And really getting to the reliable promises, really getting that commitment, really ensuring that they have the confidence level that they can actually do it. That leads to successful goals, and that leads to reliable promises and defining the conditions of satisfaction that's so important in lean application, in any application of construction. So all the work that's done is based on commitments, and making sure that if there's, that there's got to be a customer and a performer. Otherwise, why are we doing it? Like, it's not part of the scope. Well, why are we doing this, right? So really understanding those elements, and really reliable promising is something that really fits into the lean construction methodology really well. And it was based on a model. You can sort of Google this by Dr. Fernando Flores. And really, Flores really brought in this model that really sort of identifies the process to get the conditions of satisfaction and time that's needed to successfully perform work in complex projects, which are construction. Negotiation. So both sides should have that ability to ask questions, to clarify, to say no or to say yes, or what conditions they need to be able to perform, to actually perform the work, to make sure that it's accepted, so by the customer, the receiving the work. And so it's really this sort of process of preparation. What is it that we're trying to get done? Negotiating of what the aspect is, performing it, and accepting it. Really ties well into further studies in lean with the PDCA or the PDSA. Plan, do, study, act, or plan, do, check, act. Means the same in the process. And conditions that we need to think about with this are what questions to ask, the info you need. Again, this is based on the work of Dr. Fernando Flores. When does this need to be done? What does this need to look like? Do you have knowledge materials? It's filling in the voids of that. And it's really sort of giving you a process, which ties to things that we've been trying to discuss in this course about process and systems and goals that we're trying to commit to on a project, the time, cost, quality that we talked about, which are also described as constraints in the work. And the info you need, when, what exactly is it? Do I know when I've achieved this condition of satisfaction, acceptance? You got to know what you're trying to achieve. What are the rules around what you're trying to achieve? And do I have everything that I need to be able to do this? What would prevent me being proactive on that so that you can build in contingencies around that? What are the effects of failure on this? Knowing that who you're impacting. This happens on construction a lot. Subcontractors not able to deliver on something. And so what does that impact? Because subcontractors often don't really understand that. They understand their work and they don't see how their work fits in the puzzle. So that's taking a very individualistic approach, as I said earlier in this lecture, instead of a project satisfaction, a holistic approach to the construction project. And then if we can build in ways that everybody is successful in this process, it's going to make for a lot less adversarial project. So one other key component, there's a lot of things I can't cover in this single lecture, but another key component of lean construction is the llast planner system. That really separates it out from lean manufacturing. It really gets into a super process that was developed by Ballard and Howell early on with how do we get better engagement, how do we get better reliability in our scheduling process, because it's a big problem in construction. So master scheduling, can we meet project requirements? Who are we going to have that's going to be involved in this project so we can get their engagement early on? Phase scheduling, do we understand the methodology to be used? How do we have confidence, build confidence in the system? And so in the early stages of master scheduling, it's developing the baseline for the project and what are the timelines that we're going to be engaged in and what are the milestones going to be for this project. And the longer the schedule is out there, the less detail and the less accuracy you tend to have. But we need to account for those components so we can strive to reach those overall dates. Phase scheduling, now we could look at milestones and we could look at, well, in the next 4 months, we have this milestone we want to achieve. This project's going to take us 2 years, but in the next 4 months, we want to get here. And you've described all the milestone dates for the project. So you're going to take that milestone date and we're going to work backwards with the people that are involved in the schedule from the milestone to today. Well, how are we going to get to that milestone? All right, we're going to do what we call pull planning, which is the aspect of making sure that you don't have work waiting for workers. You're pulling the work towards the customers, pulling the work towards them. But we're engaging the people that are going to be involved in this process. That's different than traditional methods. 6-week look-aheads. In traditional methods, we do have 6-week look-aheads, so that's not that different. Those first two are drastically different. But with the 6-week look-aheads, again, you are pull planning it and you are working from the 6 weeks back to today. And you're going to have more detail in the work this coming week than in 2 weeks from now. You'll have more detail in 2 weeks from now than you'll have 3 weeks from now. Think of your own schedules. What are you going to be doing a month from now? It's not as clear as what you're going to be doing in the next week. And so that is the 6-week look ahead. And then if we get to the weekly work planning, what are we doing in this next week? Really detailing that out, collaboratively engaging the people that are involved in the project. They have a lot more expertise than you do in their specific areas, but they're going to have also, through this engagement, a lot better understanding of who's their customer, what are they trying to do to satisfy them, and what do they need to be able to do their work. And that gets into better efficiency, better collaboration in the process, and less adversarial relationships. Big. And then daily huddles on a day-to-day basis. How are we doing? And there's commitments that were placed. So it really gets into we may be able to do this, to we should be able to do this, to we will be able to do this, and then updating on each other, and also trying to look at best practices and tweaking things through these iterations day by day. And the daily huddles are actually daily meetings that are held standing up. You know how you do it on a football field? You have a huddle and the quarterback's going over what's going to be happening. Well, the daily huddle, it's done standing up. What did you do? Like, are you complete? Okay, great. Anything we learned from that? Anything we can tweak going forward into tomorrow? And there's also peer pressure because everybody was committed that they will do this. What stopped you from being able to do it? Also, if you ran into some unexpected roadblock, others have a better understanding of what's going on so they can jump in. Okay, when will you be done? All right, you'll be done by noon. We'll jump in and do this in the morning, and then you can, then we'll join up in this area in the afternoon so that you can go on to the next part. There's a lot more collaboration in solving the problems, right? One of us is not as small as all of us, and that's really sort of a premise for lean construction. And this little sort of heads up that I'm hoping that I'm sort of planting some seeds in your mind. Doesn't matter if you don't do exactly lean projects. There's all these little elements and things you can pull to improve in things and how you do things individually and for your company going forward that you end up working at. It really sort of something that permeates in the way you do things. And I thought this is probably not a bad way to finish things. So we talked about process, and we talked about trying to improve workflow. Lean is not about making you rush and making you, panic that you've got to get things done. Lean is about thinking about things in these terms. Slow is smooth and smooth is fast. I really like that term. Slow is smooth and smooth is fast.